With Gotham Knights just 2 weeks away, I figured it was time to check out the Batman Arkham games on the Steam Deck and see how they perform. This was actually rated at the top of my poll I ran a little while ago to see what game series people wanted me to test on the Steam Deck. I'll get around to the other ones pretty soon here. Now for these games, it's pretty interesting because they're actually rated as unsupported on the Steam Deck. This is not necessarily true though, because you can play these games on the Steam Deck with just a little bit of tinkering. I'll be going through the games in the order of their chronological release, so we'll start with Arkham Asylum and then go to Arkham City, and for those first two games, we're playing the Game of the Year versions, which are the upgraded versions that were released, not the original versions of them. We'll dive right into it now. Starting off here with Arkham Asylum, this game was originally released in 2009 and then the Game of the Year version came out in 2010. I remember back in the day playing this on my computer. I was really excited because I really liked physics. I always thought interactable objects in games were really cool, and NVIDIA physics was really cool back then. Now for this one, you're going to want to turn that off on the Steam Deck. We don't have an NVIDIA GPU here, so it's not going to really accelerate that at all, and it'll just give you performance problems. Additionally, you're going to want to make sure to launch this game using Proton GE. If you don't know how to set that up, it's really straightforward, so just look it up online and you can set that one up, and then go to compatibility settings and set that. Using Proton Experimental or Proton 7 led to this game crashing as soon as I exited the options menu. As far as graphics settings are concerned, we're running maxed out here with the NVIDIA physics turned off and then MSAA set to 2x. MSAA is pretty expensive, so I just tried 2x here. But playing the game, we're hitting 60 FPS very comfortably, essentially all the time. There were some hitches there, but that's probably from Unreal Engine 3 loading new areas in the game. You could probably turn up the AA settings here if you wanted to. I just stuck with 2 times though, and you definitely get good performance and great battery life here on this title. Now this title was developed originally for the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, and is on the PC as well. There was a remastered version of this game that came out to the PS4 and Xbox One, but it didn't make its way to the PC. That one's made on Unreal Engine 4, so this is the best version of the game we have here on the PC to play with. I remember when this game came out, it was just before I became a teenager, and I was really excited for the game. I played it on my gaming laptop at the time, and it definitely was very demanding on there. I didn't quite beat the game, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was one of the best looking games ever made at the time of its release. And it definitely set a trend for the industry for games like this with combat styles like this going forward. Even the Spider-Man game from Insomniac definitely borrows from the combat system here, so this title is a legendary one. So in general, just turn on Proton GE, turn things up to the maximum, and make sure to leave NVIDIA physics off, and then mess with MSAA to see what you like. Now move along to Batman Arkham City here. It's actually pretty crazy to think now that just 2 years after the release of a massive AAA game like Batman Arkham Asylum, we get Arkham City, which is definitely a way larger game in scope than Arkham Asylum. Nowadays, the development cycle between big AAA games like this is much longer. Now to get this one working fine, I just switched over to Proton Experimental, which everybody should have access to, and then I also went ahead and changed to windowed mode in the options settings here in the launcher. Full screen mode can cause problems with the game, like it not launching at all. So if you're having any problems booting the game up, try this out. Just like Asylum before it, this game is built in Unreal Engine 3, but it does have some graphical option upgrades here. I remember this being one of the first games that really featured DX11 features, and here in the options menu, we can enable them. Here I opted to go with these features enabled, and I played around with MSAA enabled, but that was definitely affecting our FPS significantly because it's a very expensive feature, so I went ahead and changed that over to FXAA on high. I still think this looks pretty good. Nowadays, FXAA is not as common as we have TAA, which looks better in my opinion in most scenarios, and is also not very expensive like MSAA is. Once again, if there's any NVIDIA specific settings, we're going to leave them off as we're using an AMD APU here. With the settings that I just gave you, I was able to hit 60 FPS basically all the time in the game, and in the benchmark I averaged 60 FPS as well, so this is a good feeling, and taking this game on the go is pretty cool. I still think the graphics in this game are very nice, and that's in part to the art style, which is still holding up very well today. Honestly, all the games in this franchise really have the Unreal Engine 3 look to them, as they're all using Unreal Engine 3, and that engine just has such a distinct look. Things like Gears of War, or basically any other game from that era, Bulletstorm for instance, they all have a very similar look, and have a lot of times jacked male characters like we see in Batman here, with even Gordon looking quite ripped. I did notice more performance fluctuation in this title than we saw in Batman Arkham Asylum, but if I had to guess, that's probably because we're moving through a much larger environment much faster, so there's probably more loading that's going on, so we get some frame drops here and there, but it's not that bad. One other thing to note is that the battery is taking a large toll here to hit 60 FPS versus what we saw with Batman Arkham Asylum, so just keep that in mind if you're using these graphic settings. You could definitely lock things down to 40 FPS for a very enjoyable gameplay experience and save quite a bit on your battery life. Moving along, we have Batman Arkham Origins now, and this one was not developed by Rocksteady. This one was instead developed by WB Montreal for the single-player component, and the multiplayer component was developed by Splash Damage. Now today, I'll only be looking at the single-player component of this game. I didn't even check out the multiplayer, but if I had to guess, the multiplayer servers are probably completely dead and shut down by now. The reception around this title wasn't quite as warm, and that was probably due in part to this game not being developed by Rocksteady, so people might have seen it in a different light, and things like the voice actors for Batman and the Joker being different actors. Now to get this one running, I just went ahead and used Proton Experimental in the compatibility settings, and then for this one you actually change graphical options in the game itself, which I definitely prefer. Once again here, I would recommend turning on the AA to FXAA at high. MSAA is too expensive if you want to hit 60 FPS in this title. For the other graphics settings, I basically turned them up as high as I can go, and this game was released in 2013 also, so DX11 was still being adopted at the time, so some of the highest version of the settings are using DX11 options. Performance-wise, using these settings, I found this title run extremely similarly to Batman Arkham City. If anything, maybe this one ran a little bit more intensively, but you don't really move through open environments that are as large as the ones in Batman Arkham City here. Now this game actually did feature the worst bugs that I saw in any of the games that I played today. During my fight with Crocodile at the end, the game just totally bugged out and threw a black screen up, and then I reloaded a checkpoint and tried again, and when I was fighting him, the sound cut out. So I don't know if these are problems just specific to the Steam Deck or this version of Proton, but honestly it might just be a problem with the game itself. That issue aside, this game does run pretty well on the Steam Deck, and maybe that issue is related to Proton, so trying out Proton GE might work better for you. And finally, we have Batman Arkham Knight, which came out in 2015. Now, this game is notorious for having a disastrous port to PC, which luckily has been cleaned up now and is much better. This game is once again built on Unreal Engine 3, but it was targeting the Xbox One, PS4, and PC, so we've jumped ahead a generation, and the graphics here are definitely better, and the game is quite a bit more demanding now. For this one, I could just fire it up without setting a specific version of Proton, and the game just launched fine. As far as graphic settings go, I'm using basically high to start off with all the extra NVIDIA GameWorks stuff turned off. Now, depending on the scene here, performance can be quite intensive. In close-ups, you can hit 60 FPS, or in fights that aren't really looking at the city, but as soon as you're flying around the city or driving around the Batmobile, a ton of effects are going off, and you're moving through large environments very fast, and this takes a toll, and we can drop down to the 30 FPS range if we keep things on high. Now, I'd recommend locking this game to 40 FPS, and to do that, maybe drop some things down to normal, as I did here. This kept me above 40 FPS for most of the time, but I still saw some drops down below that during the most intensive scenes. You can drop some settings down to low if you want to, or if you want, you can drop the resolution down, and then use FSR to upscale the game. It's all a matter of preference, so do what you want, but probably target 40 FPS for this one here. Visually, this game still holds up pretty well. The characters are the most detailed we've seen, definitely by far, and the environments are extremely intricate, blowing the other ones out of the water here. Now, I never played that much Arkham Knight at launch because I was mostly a PC gamer at that point, and I had heard horror stories of how bad the PC part was, which made me sad because the game looked amazing. Now, one gripe about this game I've seen online and heard from my friends is that this game has too much vehicular combat, and that's a bummer because I definitely prefer to play as Batman myself, and just from the little bit I played, I was in the Batmobile a fair bit already. I can definitely understand from a game design perspective why you'd want to use the Batmobile. It makes you feel like Batman ripping around the city using his cool tech, and as far as the next-gen consoles go, you can definitely leverage them to make the Batmobile feel really cool. Things like blowing up the environment when you're driving around are pretty awesome, but I just prefer the hand-to-hand combat personally. I mean, seriously, at some points this game almost feels like Twisted Metal, with Batman just going to town on other vehicles and blowing things up with his guns. I did want to leave you all with one disclaimer here. I've seen on ProtonDB that some of these games can have problems crashing. A lot of the reports I've seen are from months ago, and they tend to say that if you play for an hour or more, sometimes the game can crash. So just keep that in mind when you pick these ones up. I didn't experience any crashing during my playtime with these ones, but just keep that in mind. That's going to wrap it up, everybody. I really hope that Arkham Knights can hold up to what Rocksteady has accomplished over these Arkham games, and even what WB Montreal did with Arkham Origins. From the previews I've seen, I'm a bit concerned about Arkham Knights, and that game's not developed by Rocksteady, as they're making a Suicide Squad game instead, so hopefully it can live up despite being a live service game as well. Let me know down in the comments if you want me to check that game out on the Steam Deck, and if you have any thoughts about these games here. Other than that, hit the like button and definitely subscribe to the channel for more Steam Deck and gaming content. Other than that, have a good one, everybody.